So again, our job for today is to define what emotional intelligence is and how it works so that you maybe have a deeper understanding of the score you received and information moving forward. So let's kind of go into kind of the more in-depth definition um, that basically says that what emotional intelligence is the ability to perceive and express emotions. Okay. Um, and what this basically means, again, I think I mentioned this a class or so ago. It is the ability to walk into a room and have a self-awareness, having such a self-awareness of where we are in time and space, what's going on in our inside, the feelings and emotions that we are experiencing, and also at the same time having a social awareness of everybody else's emotions in the room. Okay. And then it's having this ability to then make the appropriate action to bring out the most positive results within a situation. Okay. And so I do kind of want to talk about what are the roots of this because it includes things like empathy. It includes some biological things that are going on. And so we're going to rewind our clocks to when we were about 24 months of age. Okay. And for humans, there's a unique thing that happens around 24 months of age, and it's called theory of mind. All right. So, what is theory of mind? Well, around 24 months of age, we develop this ability to recognize ourselves. And so the most basic example is that this is when young children are able to recognize themselves in a mirror and see that that is them. And it's done with a series of different experimental tasks. The most simple one is before an infant goes to sleep or a young infant goes to sleep, a child, you put the mirror in front of them and they look at them and are just kind of staring. And then when they take a nap, you put an odorless like blue or red dye on their forehead. And then when they wake up, you put the mirror in front of them again. At around 24 months of age, the infant will start rubbing their forehead and trying to figure out what this new thing on their face is. Um, and what this represents is the child's ability to do self-recognition, that that is me and this is me. And not a lot of species that we're aware of where we've done these different types of tests have this ability that, our closest genetic relatives, apes and monkeys, have this ability. Dolphins, elephants, um, so far, dogs and cats don't have this ability. I'm sorry. But however, there is some evidence that with dogs, there's a connection, but we won't get into that for the sake of this class. So first of all, at 24 months, we start to recognize ourself. Okay. And then in the other thing that we start to recognize is that other people have experiences that can be separate and different from our own. And the most simple way this is measured is you have two children at a table and you have two cups, one labeled A, one labeled B. Okay? And in front of both children, you take a ball and you put them in cup A. Okay. And then one of the children leaves the room, and in front of the other child, you take the ball out of A and put it in B. Okay. And at that moment, you ask the child, so when the other child returns, which cup should he or she look in? Okay. And again, at about 24 months of age, the child recognizes that that child last experienced that ball at uh, in cup A. Before 24 months, though, the child will say, well, they should look in cup B because that's where I saw the ball. Okay. From an emotionally expressive point of view, those are, and there's about 16 tasks or so that can measure this. Um, what is being expressed, though, is when we do, for example, observational studies, we see that if an infant be a young child under the age of about 24 months sees their mom cry, they'll start to cry because they think that their behavior shouldn't be separate from each other, that the emotional state should be the same because they don't recognize they can have their own unique experience and mom can have her own unique experience. But above 24 months of age, we recognize that a child can be really happy. And let's say mom is really sad. And it's at this point that the child will approach mom and try to comfort her or figure out why she's not having the same state or what's going on with her, because we have this ability to recognize that other people can have their own emotional state separate from our own. Okay. Now, this is the roots of empathy, but that's not where the cart, because you assume, okay, this is when we develop full empathetic processes. But I want everyone to be careful. Empathy does not always lead to helping behavior. All right. In fact, empathy for the most part leads us to avoidance behavior. So when we're walking down the street and we notice, for example, a homeless person, right? For a lot of the time, we have that empathetic emotion, but we want to escape that emotion. We want to escape that experience. So we leave the individual um, to their own device. Okay. And when we think about people who are angry, we can have the empathy of that same emotion, but we may avoid that individual. So my point being is empathy does not always result in helping behavior. Okay. What we have to do is add on the components of emotional intelligence for us to engage in helping behavior. Okay. So in the beginning, we have this ability, starting around 24 months of age, to perceive our own emotions, be self-aware of our own emotions, and then also have the awareness of others' emotions. Okay. But the second component of emotional intelligence is the ability to assimilate emotions into thought. Okay. The ability to understand one's emotional state as it's being expressed. And this is a component of emotional intelligence that is often overlooked because we assume, and it is really an assumption, that we know why we feel the way we feel. But the thing that I want to express in this moment is all the research on emotions and feelings show that they're called situationally bound emotions, meaning that emotions occur within a situational boundary. Okay. And why I want to express this at the moment is because a lot of individuals think, or I should say, the assumption has always been that emotions can transcend experience. And the truth is they really don't. We just carry those emotions with us. All right. So the most simple example is if I walk into a classroom and I have a bad experience in that classroom, I will have an emotional state in that classroom. And a lot of people's assumption is that, well, when I leave that classroom, those emotions will follow me. Those emotions will be there. But the fact is that those emotions actually will stay in that classroom, and I could go to my office, do some breathing activities, do something else, and have a different situationally bound experience within my office. Okay. And this is where understanding the reasons we have emotions and to regulate them with self and others. Okay. And so this is kind of a I know an ambiguous definition at the point, but let's just take a look at some examples of emotional intelligence. Okay. So, for example, executive competency, this is the ability to make appropriate decisions that lead to successful outcomes. This is about interpersonal communication, meaning how do we communicate with each other in a way that produces some positive outcome? Relationship management. So even emotional intelligence is just not the first interaction with someone. Once we have established a relationship, we continually learn about ourselves and the other person in order to continue that experience. And I'll bring this to intimate relationship perspective. Okay. Is people don't really recognize when you're in an intimate relationship that you have to continually change the definition of that relationship. Because I hope we all realize that we are changing constantly, that we're not the same person today as we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We're constantly evolving. But the mistake that a lot of individuals make when they're in an intimate relationship is they think the relationship is a rock, that it's the foundation that keeps the relationship together. And so what happens is you have these two individuals who are constantly evolving, constantly changing, and they wake up one morning and don't recognize the person sleeping next to them. Okay. And this is why, again, um, there's a famous statement from a person who had been in a relationship for, 50, 60 years. And they asked this person, what is the secret to a successful relationship? Because these individuals, after 60 years old, they both still had stars in their eyes. And he said that the secret to a successful long relationship is continually falling in love with the same person over and over and over. And indeed, if you go into relationship counseling, which is kind of a group process, usually one of the first advice that a relationship counselor gives is go do something new, something you haven't done before. Go on a cruise. If you're one of those that don't go camping, take a camping trip. Do something new so that you can see each other in a new light, in a new place. Okay. Social intelligence is recognizing that how you feel is not the same as how someone else should feel. Okay. It's the ability to state that if I see a child cry because they got, or a better example is the ability to, if a child is throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. Social intelligence states that just because your child didn't throw tantrums in grocery store, that makes that parent somehow bad, or that parenting family system something wrong with it. Social intelligence states There's a dynamic that is going on in that situation, um, and 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 it has nothing to do with my own experience. Okay. Um, and again, I think I've mentioned this when we've talked about group processes, is it's really important to remember that when group members start saying, well, if you would have done it the way I did it, that's that's in the group process, that's where you want to end that conversation. Because what worked for someone else doesn't necessarily work for another person. Now, giving advice is something different, and saying something like, well, when I experienced that, this is what I experienced. And I know it's ridiculous, always using that I term. I, not this is how you should experience it. And then, of course, leadership development, which is what we want to head as a facilitator, and then going on to other individuals. Now, I do want to bring up leadership because, and just to provide a warning, if you're going to study emotional intelligence, or if you want to Google it and everything, I'd be I would encourage you to read the definition of emotional intelligence that they're using, because there's a lot of literature in the business field that says emotional intelligence is not a good thing to have in the business field. Okay. But if you look at the definition they're not using the definition of emotional intelligence that we're using. They're using a definition that emotional intelligence is emotional reactivity. Okay. How quickly someone reacts to a situation based on their own emotion. Okay. And so they say, and they criticize this idea that you should make someone more emotionally reactive. Okay. That's not what we're talking about here. Emotional reactivity is actually a sign that the person has a lowered emotional intelligence, because they're not doing that self-awareness component and then exploring what's going on in the environment to determine the appropriate emotion. Okay. And this is just a quick illustration so that we know. So IQ versus emotional intelligence. When we're measuring IQ, we're looking at things like cognitive, intellectual, logic, analytical abilities, memory, how quickly someone can acquire information and new knowledge. When we're talking about the emotional quotient, we're talking about how emotionally stable the person is. And these should sound familiar from your assessment you took: the sociability, the communicative parts of the individual, and the relational ability. Okay. It's about grasping and own what as well as others' wants and needs. I didn't say that right. Grasping what you need and what the individual needs, and coming to some abilities. This is what, if you want to use this term, it's the ability to compromise in that setting. And then the last component that differentiates from IQ is it gauges how well one copes with environmental demands and pressure. Okay. So just making that quick differentiation. So and these should look familiar, I think. What are the four emotional quotients or emotional IQ attributes? Okay. Um, And I will say this model is based on those people who are very successful. This came up from Daniel Goleman. When they looked at highly successful people, high achievers, what is it that they have that people who are less successful, I guess would be a term, um, don't have? Okay. Now, I want to clarify what a high achiever is. A high achiever isn't someone who makes high amounts of income and is always the CEO of some corporation. High achievers is someone who is passionate about what they do and they work hard for what they do. And so this is, as an example, I know a lot of individuals in the class want to go into addiction counseling. This is being a thought after addiction counselor, okay? Or a thought out mental health provider. This is the therapist that is booked out for 6 months, okay? Because they're that well thought out or sought out, I should say. And so what are these things that Goldman found that these individuals have? Okay, we have a dynamic here. We have recognition what I see. So when I walk into a room, what is it that I'm seeing? What is it that I'm experiencing? And regulation of what I do. What do I do with what I'm recognizing in the environment? And then he divided these two things into what he called personal competencies and social competencies. Okay. Personal competencies is the ability to have such a self-awareness of where you're at emotionally, cognitively, mood-wise, and not assuming that you know exactly where you're at. And I want to qualify this statement. Self-awareness is not always the ability to say, "Oh, I feel this way, and therefore this is how I'm going to act." Self-awareness is making the decision, and this is where self-awareness gets into self-management. Self-awareness is the ability to say, I am really annoyed right now. And the ability to admit that maybe you really don't know why. Self-management is the ability to act on that annoyance, meaning do you try and figure out why you're being annoyed? Or if the situation demands, do you behave counter to that annoyance? Okay. Social competency is social awareness. It is the ability to see and have that empathetic connection with people in the room. It's that ability to recognize how others are feeling, if other people are annoyed as well, for example, or is it just me? Okay. And then this plays into relationship management. What do we do when we walk into a room and individuals and we are in a very good mood? Let's use this example. And we are very excited. But we walk into a room and everybody is very somber and sad because of a negative experience that occurred before you got into that situation. Okay. If you're low on this social competence, you go in and you try and cheer everybody up and go, hey, what's going on? Person in high social competence reads the room first. They talk to individuals and see what's going on. Why is it that there's this somber sadness in the room? And then based on what they understand is then how they respond. Okay. So the most basic example of someone who is low in each of these areas is someone at a funeral that all of a sudden bursts out laughing, or someone at a very happy birthday who is sad. Okay. This in both of those situations, the individual is not self-aware why they're experiencing an emotion that is different from the room, and they don't have a social awareness that that response that they're giving isn't appropriate for that situation. Okay. So self-awareness is what I see, the ability to recognize your emotions as they happen and understands your general tendencies for responding to different people and situations. What can you do with your state? Okay. Personal competency of self-management is using your awareness of your emotions to choose what you say and do in order to have it positively direct your behavior. And then under social competency, we have social awareness. What I see, understanding where other persons are coming from, whether you agree or not. Okay. Someone who has a lot of emotional intelligence understands that other people have experiences different from them, and that those experiences led that individual to where they're at and where they're in a place. Okay. Um, this is something that I work on all the time because if you look at my political bend, I'll admit I'm liberal. And I always have to remind myself when I'm interacting with someone who is very, very right-wing conservative that they have a different experience than I did that led them to their belief system. And that I really should not just approach them in an aggressive, you're wrong, what you're saying is wrong way. No, I have to constantly remind myself that of this kind of social awareness that we have different experiences that lead us to where we're at. Okay. And then relationship management is using the awareness of others and using the awareness of ourselves to choose what to say and do in order to have a positively directed behavior, having a positively conversation about things that you may have different belief systems about or different ideas about. Okay. And so we'll get into this more when we get into facilitation skills. And what we can do with this as we move along in the class. Okay. And so we can also put this on two different dimensions: recognition, which is self-awareness, social awareness. So these are the things that included in self-awareness: emotional awareness, accurate self-assessment, and self-confidence. Self-management is self-control, trustworthiness, conscientiousness, ability to adapt to different situations, and innovation. Okay. When we look at our social competency, people who tend to have high social awareness understands others, that they're driven by their empathy, but they have the idea of developing others. They have what's called a service orientation, and they leverage on diversity. Okay. With relationship management, this is someone who has good communication skills, that listening, attending, and then responding idea that we've started this course off with. They have good conflict management skills, meaning that um, well, we'll get into conflict management. They have the ability to bring down the temper of the room. Okay. They understand that they're change catalysts, but not change makers. Okay. In that we can seed, like I've said in this class before, we can seed the possibility of change, but it's really up to the individual to take that seed and grow from it. Building bonds with each other. And this is important again in the group process. Collaboration and cooperation. And there is the team capability. This is how individuals who have good relationship management make good teams that feel they're cohesive and can work together. And then, of course, we've mentioned this influence and leadership. Okay. Go through here. All right. So I want to skip to here because all this other stuff kind of goes over again, kind of more repetitive of what it is. You can look at these slides more on in Canvas about other ways to see the intrapersonal and interpersonal skills of emotional IQ and adaptability, general mood, and all those kinds of things. But what I want to talk about right at this moment, based on what you've experienced with your own emotional intelligence from the activity we did, um, and whatnot, how can we develop our emotional intelligence? So, you know, take those areas that you want to strengthen, and how can you strengthen them? The first is to listen to yourself and your emotions. Okay. Emotions are not necessarily the most rational component of a human being. And if you think about this, usually when we're at a highly emotional state, that's when we make the most mistakes. Okay. And it's listening to that and understanding what happens when we have different types of emotions. So the thing that I would like you to practice is when you feel yourself becoming highly emotionally aroused, I want you to reflect on that. What I want you to do is I want you to look at the situation. What is around you that is creating this emotion? And then I want you to look inward and think about the experiences you've had in your past and give that emotion some type of thought and some type of past. Okay. So practice that and work on that. Identify, and this is the second part to that, identify and classify your emotions. You know, um, we often throw around terms like happy or sad or angry and whatnot, and we put them all into these classifications that should fit neatly into emotional categories. So someone who can be angry usually is aggressive, but that's not necessarily true. There are some people who can be angry, and the behavior of angry is almost the opposite. They become despondent, meaning that they withdraw, they become quiet, they become reserved. Okay. So the emotion of anger does not always result in yelling and aggression. For some people, it can result in being withdrawn. And that can lead to a mislabeling of what they're experiencing. Okay. And so I want you to pay attention to your own emotional, and I want you to put your own labels to them. Notice the difference between having and acting on an emotion. Okay. Emotions at their core are signaling devices. Have an emotion doesn't necessarily mean that we have to act on that emotion. Okay. And this is the basic example. Just because I'm angry doesn't mean I have to be aggressive. Okay. So differentiating the difference between having that emotion and acting on an emotion. Learn to distract emotional states if they're interrupting with your ability to uh, um, be successful in that given situation. Okay. Um, um, with very common with especially teens who have very difficult times managing their emotions. A lot of time, especially ones that have high anxiety, often we'll have them put just like a rubber band around their wrist and we'll have it flip it. Okay. That is a form of distraction from an emotional state that they're having. Okay. Take time to note your impact on others. Okay. Um, and this can be, after you go to a group, and you're driving home, think about your emotional state in that group and how that impacted those group members and that situation. I'd encourage you to start doing that when you leave work, when you have a conversation with family and friends. Just take a few minutes and just think about the reactions and the emotions that were produced based on the behaviors that you and others did. Um, mo one of the traditions I have is at the end of the semester, when we had classrooms, or when I'm sitting here, I'll say goodbye to you all, and I'll say I hope you're all successful in your future, and we'll get off Zoom. And at the end of the semester, I'll sit here for about 45 minutes. And the thing I'm not reflecting on is, gosh, I'm glad it's done, it's over with. No, I'm reflecting on our interaction and what we went through as a class during the semester. And that has helped me, be honest with you, to let you guys go. But it also allows me to understand my experience with you guys and hopefully understand what experience you all had in the class. Set goals for yourself internally or written. And what I mean by this is you need to, again, be aware of your actions. Okay. Some people need to internally set goals and they need to remember those goals continually. Okay. Some people need to write it down. And so I'd encourage you to do your method. For me, I have to keep things internally because I have this weird thing that once I write it down, I feel like it's finished. So like a to-do list for me doesn't work. Um, I have to use other cognitive methods to continually remember what it is I need to be doing in this time in this place. And then the last one in developing emotional intelligence is slow down, think, and act. And remember this, if you need to do an acronym, STTA or STA, but in any situation, when you're about to burst or about to have a reaction, sit back, take in a big breath, think about it, and then act. And I'd encourage you all to practice this. And this is important, especially for developing group facilitation skills. Because when a group is highly emotional, um, it is very possible that the facilitator will say the wrong thing. Okay. And I kind of want you to think about this. If you've ever had an experience with someone and then you're going and you're thinking about it, and maybe you reacted because you were emotional and feelings, and you're driving home and you start thinking, I should have said this, or I should have said that. Sometimes we call this hindsight is 2020. Um, the I should have, could have, would have type of attitude. Well, what I want us to work on is not having those shoulda, woulda, coulda moments, or that I'm having hindsight moments, because all of those hindsight moments could have happened in the situation if we would have slowed down, taken a breath, understand your emotional state, understand the emotional state of the other, and then determining the action. Because that's what you're doing on the drive home. That's when you're doing when you've left the situation and you're in your own space. You're slowing down, you're thinking about it, but now you don't have the ability to act again. Now you just have to live with what you shoulda, could have, would have needed to say in that moment. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop the recording. Wait, I'm going to stop. So where are we heading? And I'll say this when we return from spring break, we're going to get into more detail about the counseling skills that we've started to talk about, and we've given this overview, these emotional intelligence skills, and we're going to look at counseling skills. And these skills can be used in a one-on-one session or in the group setting. And so this is what we're going to focus on next, is we're going to refine all of these things that we've been talking about into very specific, usable skills that I want all of you to start to really, really develop and work on. But where I want you to start is to think about your emotional intelligence assessment, the things we talked about today about how you can improve on areas that you want to improve in, and how you can capitalize on the skills that you had. I noticed in this class there was a lot of people that had like 100% on sociability or I think it was self-care. I can't remember the exact term. And so how can you use those skills to then help you with the areas that you want to improve in? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing right here.